I've spent most of my career working in either senior leadership positions at a corporation or as a strategic advisor where I was focused on driving growth and innovation. Because of this, I've had a front row seat to the seismic shifts that have reshaped the retail landscape. Frankly, it's pretty hard to overestimate the disruptive power game-changing technology has had on just about every aspect of our culture and our commerce. Today, our world looks radically different than it did when e-commerce first emerged, when smart devices started to transform how we communicate, and when operating in the cloud began moving toward ubiquity. Critically, these shifts enabled entirely new and incredibly valuable business models to emerge. These shifts also brought many iconic brands to their knees or set them on a path to seemingly endless struggle. So I have to ask, if the world has changed so much, why have so many leaders changed so little? Shift happens, and it's happening faster and faster all the time.
Welcome to a special Remarkable Retail Podcast summer series focused on what leaders need to do to help their organizations win the future and leap to higher ground. I'm Michael LeBlanc, and in this 6-part limited series, Steve will be unpacking key lessons from his new best-selling book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, available everywhere books are sold.
I grew up in the outlying suburbs of New York City in the 1960s and 70s. Like other middle-class kids from the area, I spent many a weekend being dragged around by my mother to go shopping at stores like Abraham and Straus, Caldor, and Bamberger's. On family road trips, we often stopped at Howard Johnson's for a lunch or a snack. As I got older, Lord & Taylor became my go-to place to buy my grandmother a birthday gift or Christmas present. In college, my favorite places to buy albums, whether vinyl or 8-track, were Tower Records and Sam Goody. After I got my MBA, I worked for a large global consulting firm, and I frequently lugged around a 22-pound compact computer on more plane trips than I care to mention. Our firm's client reports were produced by an in-house graphics department that used a dedicated machine to take text from a Wang word processing workstation that could only be operated by a trained administrative assistant, and Lotus 123 spreadsheets printed out on a dot matrix printer to turn them into good-looking hard copy reports and transparencies. My first house was outfitted with furniture my then wife and I had purchased from Marshall Fields and Carson Peary Scott, two iconic Chicago department stores founded in 1852 and 1854 respectively. For years, our bookcases were chock-a-block with a truly frightening number of CDs and VHS tapes. As our young daughters grew older, a typical Friday night might include a trip to Blockbuster to rent a movie, or maybe one of the kids would occupy herself playing a Game Boy. Our first home computer came from Gateway. We accessed the internet by inserting an AOL floppy disk and connecting to the internet via a dial-up modem.
You've got mail.
When I eventually joined the senior leadership team at Neiman Marcus in 2004, much of my life seemed centered on my shiny new Palm Pilot. My colleagues were similarly glued to their devices, but for whatever reason, theirs were primarily BlackBerries. At this point, you can probably surmise where I'm headed with all this. As I recount in my new book, Leaders Leap, and as most of us of a certain age might well recall, products, technologies, and brands that were once hugely popular in the not-too-distant past are now completely gone or mere shells of their former dominant selves. Nowhere is this more evident than in retail. Let's set the Wayback Machine for 1995 and consider what shopping for just about anything was like toward the end of the last century, when the internet, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist. Think about it. Something like 98% of all retail activity involved going to a physical location to see what the store had on offer, maybe getting some sales help, toting your selected merchandise to a cash register, paying for it, and carting it home with you. Now, whether the shop you visited had what you wanted at all, or had it in your desired size or color, well, that was a bit of a gamble, and there was little to no information on product quality or the best price to pay. Then this all began to change, slowly at first, but then faster and faster. Within a few years, much of what we called retail or shopping was completely transformed. Let's briefly recap some of the most profound shifts that have reshaped the competitive landscape. Accessibility shifted from being limited by store hours and the number of retailers you were willing to invest the time and maybe the fuel cost to visit, to a nearly infinite array of options available virtually anywhere, at any time, in any way. Product choice was no longer limited to what would fit on the shelves of the stores situated in your town or nearby. Instead, it became a nearly endless aisle of abundance. Information about product quality, features and benefits, and in-stock availability all became fast and easy to acquire in most cases. Price, once largely a take-it-or-leave-it proposition that the vendor decided upon, became less of a given as pricing and promotional data became available through dedicated websites or browser extensions. Increased competition also generally led to a lowering of prices on many items, upending the underlying economics of many business models. Convenience has gotten fundamentally redefined. As e-commerce grew, the number and variety of products that could be directly delivered to one's home or office has expanded dramatically. And products that were typically delivered saw their net prices and delivery times shrink. Fast and easy returns and convenience features like buy online and pick up in store became commonplace. A profound shift in connection became massively important to the buying experience. Before an era of unrelenting digital disruption, our connections were largely confined to family, friends, coworkers, and maybe a house of worship or club to which we belonged. Today, depending upon how active we are on social media, we may well have many thousands of friends or followers, most of whom we can communicate with instantaneously. Social media influencers are also increasingly important to the success of many retail brands. Of course, by now we know that entirely new business models have harnessed these shifts to reshape most subsectors of retail. Amazon is the most obvious example, but so-called digitally native brands like Warby Parker have leveraged these shifts to great effect. The elimination and friction and the ability to marry supply and demand has been central to the emergence of marketplace models like eBay and Etsy, as well as much of the entire resale or circular economy model powered by companies like Poshmark and ThredUp. And there seems to be no end in sight, particularly as a wave of disruption is being ignited by the rapid evolution and deployment of generative AI and large language models. In fact, if anything, the pace of disruption is only accelerating. And to quote jazz legend Miles Davis, if you aren't nervous, you aren't paying attention. Yet despite all these profound shifts, we do in fact see lots of organizations that have been sleepwalking through this revolution or slow-walking what counts as actual transformation. While the world changed all around them, while they saw their acquisition, customer growth, and retention rates plummet, while market share migrated to new competition, they mostly watched, or, as we talked about in the first episode of this series, signed up for what has turned out to be a timid transformation. So this is probably a good time to talk about the subtitle of my new book, which is Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption. Now, of course, this subtitle begs two pretty important questions. First, how much do I need to change to future-proof my organization? Or as we framed last week, how much higher do you need to aim in the customer value you deliver to be truly remarkable and create meaningful and lasting differentiation? Second, how fast do you need to move? Or stated a bit differently, what does the speed of disruption look like for my corner of the retail world? Broadly speaking, you need to start by becoming keenly aware of the current and potential impact of macro, customer, and technology shifts, and rigorously accept the likely speed and magnitude of their impact. But awareness is pretty useless if there is not acceptance, and ultimately, and more critically, if there is no action. Speaking of awareness, I know that I probably speak about the decline of U.S. department stores way too much, but it is a familiar and easy to understand example, and one that shows the harsh impact of failure to address these profound shifts. While it's easy to blame Amazon or e-commerce more broadly for all of the department store's woes, let's remember a few things. Department stores began losing market share well before Amazon had a competitive offering. And of course, nothing has ever prevented Macy's, JCPenney, Kohl's, or any other department store in the US or around the world from having a compelling online presence. No, in fact, the precipitous decline of the sector and the collapse of what I call the unremarkable middle more broadly is a function of the shifts I outlined earlier in the episode. Having mostly a bunch of quite average stuff that I have to invest a lot of time to go see and sort through is no longer so interesting with the explosion of offline and online alternatives. When I can access apparel and home products at a great price much more conveniently, think TJ Maxx or just about any other off-price example, why do I need to go elsewhere? When Ulta and Sephora deliver a more focused offering close to the other stores I travel to more frequently, why would I make a special trip to the mall only to be harassed by aggressive salespeople? When dozens of specialty stores have emerged to better meet my specific wants and needs, why would I put up with the sea of sameness and lack of customer service that often epitomizes the anchor stores of many malls? Indeed, the world of department stores has changed a great deal, and the industry incumbents have changed very little. The penalty for sleepwalking through this revolution, for merely watching shifts happen, has been huge. The retail market share that department stores command has dropped from about 5% in 2000 to well under 1% today. The stock market value of the top 5 North American department stores combined is now less than Ulta's, a specialty store that only participates in categories that represent about 10% of a typical department store mix. Off-price retailers like TJX have gone from small players at the turn of the century to far, far greater sales and stock market valuations than all of the iconic department stores. But frankly, when it comes to the speed of disruption, things have been rather slow in the realm of brick-and-mortar dominant retail. The decline of department stores, bookstores, video rental shops, or certain so-called category killers like Bed Bath & Beyond and Toys R Us has been like watching a slow-motion car crash. But the speed of disruption is becoming breathtakingly fast in many corners of the retail world. In barely more than a couple of years, direct-from-factory players like Shein and Temu have gone from essentially non-entities to major disruptors that are very likely to soon rank in the top 10 of all global retailers in terms of GMV. Retail media networks, which until recently barely anyone besides Amazon was focused on, are fast becoming major profit contributors for several major retailers. Generative AI, which virtually nobody outside of academia and esoteric startups was talking about just 2 summers ago, will soon have massive impact on just about all parts of retail. And does anyone doubt we will soon be talking less about digitally native vertical brands and more about artificial intelligence native brands? When it comes to understanding the speed of disruption, your mileage may vary, but I reckon you are likely to experience more disruption in the next 3 years than you have in the past 10. I'd act accordingly. The seismic shifts of the past 2 decades lead to a few inescapable conclusions. More and more, you are in competition with the universe. Offer a little bit of everything to everybody, and you end up not being much of anything to anybody. We are in an epic battle for attention. Deliver anything less than remarkable, and you are quite likely to be ignored. And the collapse of the middle will continue unabated. If the past is any indicator of the future, spoiler alert, it most certainly is, it's hard to know or sometimes even imagine where things are headed with any level of precision. As a wise person once said, it is difficult to make predictions, particularly about the future. But shifts will continue to happen, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes more profoundly than others, other times not so much. You may not love this volatile and uncertain state of affairs. You may not fully appreciate how revolutionary the shifts that continue to send waves of disruption through the retail ecosystem truly are, nor what the impact of future shifts, anticipated or otherwise, might ultimately be. Indeed, as comedian and noted retail futurist Nate Bargatze has said,
like the world is so future now.
But regardless, the inexorability of these shifts is like picking a fight with gravity. Gravity doesn't care what you think of it. Gravity always ultimately wins. The challenge, therefore, is not to figure out how to mount resistance, but to accept the things you cannot change, get intensely focused on the things you can, and then get to work. Shift happens. Get used to it. Shift happens. Shake hands with the new weird. Shift happens. Don't let it destroy your future. Shift happens. Summon up all the courage you require. Shift happens. Get ready to leap. During each of the episodes in this 6-part special transformational leadership series, I will conclude with a few questions to bring some of the material to life and to help you think about how to apply these concepts to your own organization and its unique situation. In addition to answering them for yourself, these weekly questions can be great thought starters for a strategy session or one of your senior leadership team meetings. Here are this week's queries. Number 1. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how well does your organization stay aware of major shifts, align on their potential impact, and put rigorous plans to address them in place? Number 2. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is the likelihood that you are vulnerable to a high level of disruption during the next 3 years or so? Number 3. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you are well prepared to navigate the impact of current and potential disruption? And lastly, number 4. If your answers to the above questions might put you in the world is changing a lot, but we might not be ready to change enough box, what do you need to do to address this potential major vulnerability? Next week, we'll take a hard look into the mirror and see how our egos often get in the way of the progress we need to make on our transformational journey. As author Stephen Pressfield reminds us, there is an enemy. That enemy is you. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to a special Summer Leaders Leap bonus edition of the Remarkable Retail Podcast, hosted by Steve Dennis and produced by me, Michael LeBlanc. Season 9 of the Remarkable Retail Podcast returns in its usual format on September 10th. Follow us wherever you enjoy your podcast, and don't forget to drop us that 5-star review. Safe travels, everyone.